My.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to tonight's virtual author presented in collaboration with Miami Book Fair, Lit Hub, and Culture Crusaders. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for supporting a locally owned independent bookstore in Books and Books. Tonight, we are thrilled to be able to host two authors of what we feel are vital and timely works of fiction for young readers. In AGNES at the End of the World by Kelly McWilliams, 17-year-old Agnes must escape the only home she's ever known to save her brother's life and ultimately make heartbreaking decisions between her family and the rest of the world. In Black Brother, the follow-up to the New York Times bestselling Ghost Boys, Jewell Parker Rhodes addresses institutional racism, classism, and colorism in a powerful and accessible manner that challenges readers to consider their own microaggressions. Kelly McWilliams is a mixed-race writer who always gravitated towards stories about crossing boundaries and forging new identities. For this and so many other reasons, young adult literature is close to her heart. Kelly has also worked as a staff writer for Romper, covering issues important to women and families. She lives in Colorado with her partner and young daughter. Jewell Parker Rhodes is the author of Ninth Ward, winner of a Coretta Scott Award, Sugar, winner of the Jane Addams Children's Book Award, and the New York Times bestselling Ghost Boys. She has also written many award-winning novels for adults, and when she's not writing, Jewell visits schools to talk about her books and teaches writing at Arizona State University. So before I hand this over to Jewell and Kelly, I want to point out to everyone that at the bottom in the right corner, there is an Ask a Question button, and we'll be using that, the question submitted there for the Q&A portion tonight. I'll also remind you that there is a button as well for where it will link you to Jewell and Kelly's most recent novels. So you'll find Black Brother, and Agnes at the World there, but you can also search any of their other titles and we can ship those to you. So thank you again for supporting an independent bookstore, and I want to warmly welcome Kelly McWilliams and Jewell Parker Rhodes and hand this over to them.
Thank you so much. Hi, Christina. Thank you. We're so delighted to be here. And Kelly, I'm so delighted to see you virtually.
I know, it's wonderful. We haven't actually seen each other in real life since before the pandemic began. So we always like doing these events.
Absolutely. You know, Kelly, besides being my daughter, is very special to my heart because she really helped me with my creativity. When I was a new mom, I had gotten 13 rejections for my book Voodoo Dreams, and I was about to give up. And then looking at her and having her beside my office desk in her crib, she inspired me to keep going because I thought, if I don't do my best, if I don't try my hardest, then how would I ever be able to tell you to do the same? And so I went back, and sure enough, my career started. So when Kelly was pregnant, I told her it'll be the best thing ever, because while most people will say it'll take away from your time and creativity, I found that it sort of like enlarged and enhanced my life and creativity. So Kelly, did that work out for you?
No, it absolutely was true. And I completely didn't believe you when you used to tell me, but my book, which is called Agnes at the End of the World, I don't think I could have written it without my daughter. I started it while I was pregnant with her, and she's 3 years old now. But we should probably introduce our books for people. So okay. Black Brother, tell me.
Oh, that's me. Oh. I was ready for more Agnes. Well, Black Brother, you're all grown up now. So while you still inspire me, Black Brother was actually more historically inspired by my novel Ghost Boys, which is about, the killing of young Black children such as Emmett Till, Tamir Rice, Trayvon Martin. And while I was working on that book, I discovered, more information about the school to prison pipeline, how children of color K through 12 are more likely to be suspended, more likely to be arrested for talking back, say in class. And once these children become involved with the criminal justice system, they're less likely to graduate from high school, and they are more likely to actually be in the prison system. So Black Brother is about two brothers, one who presents darker and one who presents light as though he were white. And the brother who is darker is actually arrested, taken to jail for a crime he didn't commit. And it's about his journey through that prejudice and through that bullying of the criminal justice system. It's also about the colorism. Like, why should people who are related or of the same human family but have different skin tones be treated differently? Why should we privilege one group over the other? And so these are two brothers who stay tight, stay together, who face the world in its prejudice.
It's an amazing book, and I absolutely love it. And I love its great representation, really important representation for me, because as a family growing up, like, we had these different skin tones. My brother is much darker and I am much lighter. And people didn't want to believe that we were family. Like, some people were actually offended, and they would even argue with us when we were children, like, no, you can't possibly be related.
And I would get so angry about that. So oftentimes people would think that I was Kelly's nanny, or that my husband, this, tall, handsome white guy, it's like, oh, how nice of you to adopt the Black baby, and it would drive us batty. But some of the most traumatic times were when race, particularly for Evan, interfered, and really traumatized us all. So we went through the battering of Rodney King, the race riots in Los Angeles, but it really was in school that typically he, as a child of color, received all kinds of prejudicial treatment that showed differences for how people respected him versus you, or how they disrespected him versus you. It was very straining, and I always felt as though the society was trying to tear us apart. And you are such a good sister. And, we all held together strong and loving. Kelly, tell me about Agnes. What inspired you to write Agnes at the End of the World, besides
Yeah.
Claire, our grandbaby? My grandbaby.
Agnes at the End of the World is a story, as you've heard, of a teenage girl who escapes from a fundamentalist cult. It's set in Arizona. I know we have a Jeanette here from Arizona. So it's set in northern Arizona near Flagstaff area. Sort of the Grand Canyon landscape was what I was really imagining as I was working on this book. And the very first glimmer of an idea came to me while I was pregnant. I saw a girl moving through this desert landscape, this Sonoran desert landscape. And she was clearly running from something. And I wanted to know, what was she running from and where was she going? She was also, because this was a pregnancy dream, taking care of a small child. And so I wanted to know her story, and I sort of delved into it from there. At that point in my life, we were living in Honolulu, and the Zika outbreak had just started to hit really, really hard. And so I was getting these warnings on NPR, pregnant women, stay away from standing bodies of water, wear DEET every day, whether or not it was toxic or non-toxic to the baby, just mosquito repellent like crazy. And while it just gave me this glimpse of how awful it could really be if a serious public health crisis took hold. And so then there's kind of this irony of that I wrote this book channeling, I think, my fears about becoming a parent and my fears about fundamentalist strains in our politics, and my fears about possible pandemics, and then I'm launching it during a pandemic as well. So this book came out Tuesday, June 9th, and it has been quite a journey.
Both of us have had books that have been launched in a pandemic. My book was out March 3rd, and my book tour was canceled because of the pandemic. But I feel as though, because of the protests, particularly regarding the horrific murder of George Floyd, that my book is timely and relevant, and your book as well is super timely and relevant. But what about hope, Kelly? What hope is there in your book for kids, young adults, and adults reading your People Best Reads of the Summer book, Agnes at the End of the World?
Well, in order to survive, essentially, Agnes leaves her cult expecting to find an outside world that is healthy, that is better for her and her brother. Her brother has her younger brother has type 1 diabetes. And if he stays in that cult, he's not going to survive because medicine is forbidden. Beyond the misogyny, beyond the sort of polygamist practices, medicine is forbidden. And she knows that her younger brother won't survive there. So when she finally gets the courage to run, she's expecting this outside world to be this much better place, but it's being plagued by this pandemic. And at the moment, I can't help but think about all of the high school seniors and college seniors who just graduated, what they must be going through to find that the world is not what they had been prepared for. But every single one of my characters, she joins sort of a band of survivors that journey through the desert, including a nurse, including some other teenagers that she meets out there in the world. Every single one of them must believe in something strongly enough that it will see them through. And in this book, it doesn't really matter so much what you believe as long as you sincerely believe it. So Agnes, though she's fleeing a cult, maintains and changes and shifts the type of faith that she holds in God. But I also have an atheist character, and what helps him survive the pandemic is his faith in science and in public health measures. I think we've seen in our actual pandemic, like some people are getting through it by sourdough bread alone. And it's just whatever it takes, and whatever mission you can have. And for, of course, Agnes's younger brother, Ezekiel, it's his faith in Agnes. So we can also put our faith in other people and get through much more than we think we're capable of.
Well, Agnes so reminded me of Octavia Butler and her characters, because the book transitions from scripture sayings to other scripture sayings that have been selected by the patriarchs, which are being used and misused in misogynist ways, where she begins writing her own stories, her own writings, her own sort of spiritual beliefs. And I love one where she says, in effect, rebellion can be creative, rebellion can be destructive. Be careful of which one you choose. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, I mean, the message that I really wanted to get through to teenagers was that the world can't end unless we let it, unless you let it. I mean, we've got kids who are facing not only pandemics and, whatever's going on in the political world, but also climate change and some very serious things coming up in their future. I wanted to write a story in the vein of The Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler, where you see a girl go from she starts out as an oppressed child and she transforms herself into a prophet and a leader. So she says, you know what, I will remake this community. I will take back what was stolen from us, and I will try and build a better, more just world. The very first sentence of this book is, "Are you in rebellion?" And it's a sentence that just resonates deeply throughout the book and in my heart, because I do think that we should all be in rebellion all the time. And looking at these uprisings that we're seeing now, I think it stands very, very true.
It's funny because as a mom, parenting a teenager can be very, very challenging. But not too long ago, I was speaking to some middle grade students where I was talking about, no, you need to be critical thinkers, and it's okay to differ with your parents. It's okay to be in rebellion. And it's interesting because I think Black Brother carries that message. Your novel carries that message. But in Black Brother, while he doesn't start Dante, the Black Brother doesn't start a cult or a new kind community. He starts with his own self-esteem, his center of self-love. And his message, my message to kids, is to be you, even if others can't see you. That being able to say, I am, and be inclusive of all that you are and of your heritage is in fact the fundamental civil right for all of us. And from that stems the confidence to be at one with the world and to become an empowered person.
And I want to point out too that Black Brother, one of my favorite things about this book, and there is a buy link at the bottom of your screen. It says purchase both titles from Books and Books. It's a wonderful independent bookstore, so you should do that. But Black Brother, it's also a sports story. So can you tell us about that aspect?
Me, a sports story. I always
she swore she'd never write one, but she did.
Well, I always like to write books that I think I can't write. it stretches me. But I also had a writing mentor, and I love to talk about your writing mentor, Kelly. But my writing mentor, when I was a young woman, would always encourage me to do the hard things, to do what I didn't think I could do, so that I would grow as a writer. And so, Towers Falling, my book about 9/11, I didn't think I could do it, but I hung in there and I did it. My novel Ghost Boys, I didn't think I could do it, and I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to write about police murdering youth, but I did it. And Black Brother, about colorism and sports, I didn't think I could do that either, because it's about en garde fencing. But I have been interested in fencing ever since I learned over 30 years ago that Alexander Dumas was a Black Frenchman. And when he was writing The Three Musketeers, The Count of Monte Cristo, he was writing about his dad. And his dad was known as the Black Count, a famous general and a great swordsman for Napoleon. But in TV and in films and in the books, the characters always seemed white aristocrats. So I think, what would it have been like for kids growing up in sports to know that, hey, you could be a fencer, you can get a scholarship to college, you could be on the Olympic team. And actually, Peter Westbrook was a award-winning fencer, a champion, and he started a foundation, the Peter Westbrook Foundation, where he has been training inner city kids how to fence. And our most recent Olympic team that was in Brazil fencing, about 6 of them were children of color, primarily African American, 2 were Asian American, and all of a sudden we had this representation in fencing that we historically haven't had. So I like writing a fence book. So think of Karate Kid, which I love. Karate Kid as a fencing kid meets racism, racial bias, and colorism. So there.
It's wonderful. It's an amazing book. It's one of your most personal, and it's one of my personal favorites too.
Absolutely. Well, I've got to ask you that when I started writing, I knew that I wanted to write for middle grade. Did you always know you wanted to write for YA, Kelly?
So I have always felt that there's something special that happens when you read a book as a teenager or a young adult. I read Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower when I was a teenager. I read Song of Solomon. I read also those old classics, the Robin McKinley's The Hero and the Crown. And I think that those books shaped my identity. And more, not exactly shaped, but they offered me the choices to make so that I could choose. I could see, what type of person do I want to be? Do I want to be brave? Do I want to be this? Do I want to be that? What do I really care about? There's just something magical about that time. And I think there's probably, if we have any psychologists out there, there's probably crazy stuff going on in your brain where you're making these decisions. Who do I want to present myself as in the world? How do I want to live? And just the impact that reading had on me, I knew that I would always want to write for young adults. And that has continued. They're my favorite demographic. Every time I hear that a teenager has read Agnes, I'm just over the moon, because it's a magical time. And those long summers when you can just sink into a book too, it's a fleeting time. So to be able to offer an exciting adventure story, I hope, to teenagers, that's just magic to me.
You've done a great job, and I know that those starred reviews that you get from various publications so give sort of objective support that Agnes at the End of the World is a really, really good book, and I am so very proud and happy for you at this moment. You remind me of myself, because we were about the same age when we published our first books, but I felt middle grade to me was the most important age group to write for, because I saw that as sort of the development from being, a child to becoming that person, that rite of passage, that, the cusp of self-identity. But I also think that for me, I was so unhappy as a child, and a lot of my childhood years, a lot of things I repressed. So I get to go back and relive being a middle grader by writing these stories. But I must tell you, I was terrified of writing for youth because I think youth deserve our very, very best. And I spent almost 30 years writing books for adults, trying to get ready to write for youth. So I just love how, in terms of the fears that I had, that you broke through them, that they didn't like box you in, and your voice has just been soaring. Bravo to you.
Oh, thank you. Well, really, really sweet. So it looks like we hit the 20-minute mark. Did we say we'd start opening for questions? If anyone has questions now.
Questions, let's hear them.
Yes.
Hey, Christina.
So that was wonderful. I think you guys have like the cutest dynamic. I've never seen like a mom and daughter author duo in conversations. That was awesome. Love it.
Yeah, I like to say Kelly is the more mature of the two.
No.
But I obviously adore and love my daughter, but there is like a part of my brain that if somebody had predicted that we would be together in this moment, I would have said, what? And it is so cool and so much fun. So thank you, Books and Books.
Yeah. I mean, I guess in some ways, like, because we had to pivot to virtual, like the way that any author can be in conversation with any author at any time, so you guys can have events together even when you can't be physically together.
Yeah.
So I'll start with the first question, which is, what have you been reading during the pandemic?
Oh, Kelly, you go first.
Yes, I would love to take this one. So I will say my book contains a pandemic. It is a fantasy pandemic. So it's more like, just think fantasy magic. It's not realistic. It's spread by touch. It has metaphorical elements. But it can be a trigger for people. I mean, we've gone through so much, like the lockdowns, the quarantines, the deaths. I mean, it's not going to be for everyone right now. I find that sometimes people want escapism, which is perfectly fine. And we have great escapism recommendations. There's some wonderful like YA rom-coms out there right now that I'm loving. But other people, they want to dive deeper into the current situation. And I was one of those people. So when the pandemic hit, I read every pandemic book I could find. I highly recommend A Beginning at the End by Mike Chen. It's wonderful. And also Ling Ma's Severance, which I think does a really good job of highlighting the way pandemics and capitalism might be related. Just me personally, I tend to want to go tunnel towards the dark because I think that one of the ways as a culture that we communicate the wisdom that allows us to survive and thrive is by putting it into these stories. And certainly, Agnes's message is one of hope. It won't be for everyone right now, but if it's not for you right now, maybe think of me in a couple months. What have you been reading, Jewell?
Well, one thing I do try to do, I try to read all the books my daughter tells me I should be reading because she really does keep me up to date. But when I'm writing a new book and I'm writing a new novel about climate change, I do a lot of reading and a lot of research on that topic. So actually, I've been reading things about how to put out a campfire, about hiking, about wildfires, the lack of wilderness and sustainability to write this new book. But in terms of other books, I love The Only Black Girls in Town by Brandy Colbert. I'm reading Varian Johnson's Coretta Scott King Honor Book Award, The Parker Inheritance. I also, in terms of like to read a lot of adult books, and I like The Color of Law an awful lot because it really educated me on how the U.S. government contributed to segregated communities and how decisions made, how whites would live in suburbs and blacks would live in these tall, apartment ghettoized buildings really has had an impact that we're even seeing today. I also like to recommend Jason Reynolds and Professor Kendi's Stamped. It's a great book that explains colorism, how easy it was for people throughout the world and over time to pick people of different colors and to say you're other and to use that as an excuse to enslave and oppress them. I would recommend Professor Kendi's book, the adult National Book Award winning book of Stamped, for just the adult read. The other thing I'd recommend would be Just Mercy, the adult book I teach, and it's absolutely splendid. And at the very end of the book, there's a really concise history of how racism got its start in America towards Black people and how it's been systematically institutionalized in our culture. The film Just Mercy, is a really good film, but it lacks all the sort of nuances and the stuff that you really want to think about and learn more about in terms of our culture. But there is a new Just Mercy book for kids about African American men and women imprisoned unjustly. And I haven't read that yet, but I think it's probably is something that, that kids should be aware of. And in particular, I would echo for all people out there, just as we're fighting against, harm and violence towards people of color, that the criminal justice system, in order to, quote, protect children that they've falsely imprisoned, they will then put them in solitary confinement to keep them safe from the general population, even though the solitary confinement itself is a trauma that destroys their minds and their lives.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Those were great recommendations. So I have another question here. Did not know you were related, much less mother and daughter. What was it like to grow up with an author, Kelly, and what is it like to have birthed an author, Jewell? How are the pressure and expectations, or is it more like someone to bounce ideas off of?
Great question.
Wow, maybe I'll go first, and we'll see how this goes. Okay, so I felt very, very lucky, especially growing up as I do identify as a woman of color, although I often am accidentally passing. I'm practicing anti-passing now. Like, I am a Black woman writer. And so seeing my mother write every single day, it seemed very normal to me. It seemed like that's what Black ladies do. They like sit down and write their novels. And I used to watch the printer when it would print out your hundreds of pages and be so impressed. And so it felt natural to me to start typing, to pick up my pen, to try and tell stories. As long as I can remember, I always wanted that. And it was very much in emulation of you. I also remember we had, MFA students who were my babysitters, and they were also all Black women. So just to further normalize the situation, I was like, yep, this is what it is. I can't remember a time when I didn't want it. And I also can't remember a time when it didn't feel like the door was open for me. And I know that very much is the opposite of your experience.
Yes. When I was a kid, the family, we couldn't afford books. And in fact, my grandmother raised me because my mother left the family when I was 8 months old. So teachers and librarians kept me well fed imaginatively with books, and through no fault of their own, but really about the culture and the publishing industry. All the children's books that I was reading were written by white authors, and they had white characters. So even though I wrote all the time, I didn't think that I could be a writer. I didn't think that people of color wrote books. And it wasn't until I was a junior in college that I found out that Gail Jones, she was on the library shelf of new titles, had a book about the African American experience in slavery. And it was like, what? Black women write books? And I changed my major that next day. And I took a lot of creative writing classes where my classmates, who were all white, would say, why don't you tell me your characters are Black? And I'd go, well, why don't you tell me your characters are white? And I learned that I had been, brainwashed to read characters as being white, not unless the author told me so. But I was also growing up as a young woman and a young assistant professor during the era when African American studies, Native studies, Hispanic studies, women's studies was coming of age. And when I went out to look for my very first job, they wanted to hire me as an African American studies professor. And in those days, my generation, we were teaching ourselves subjects that we hadn't learned in school. So that was a blessing. And I got the confidence to speak my voice, but it was still very hard. I remember when Kelly was a little girl, I was writing and I was like, she's maybe 10. And Kelly came up to me and said, "Oh, Mom, just get on with it." I was like, and I also, though we talked about Kelly, writing Agnes as her first book, she also read like at least 100 books every summer. And she also wrote a book when she was a youngster, and she came out of her room and said, "Here, you want to read this?" So it was very much natural to her in a way that it was so unnatural to me, and still is. I'm still impressed by your ability to just write, and I still have those moments of angst.
Well, I love the second part of this question too. Like, how do we manage the pressure and expectations? And, are we people we bounce ideas off? And what I would say to that is that the other thing that my mother modeled for me was that the person you bounce ideas off is your spouse. So my poor husband, Bill, became the person who reads most of my drafts and who I'm always like, wow, what if I did this with the next book? And are you listening to me? And like, and that's just, I literally heard you having those conversations in the kitchen with my father, and my husband has taken up that mantle for me, for which I'm eternally grateful. I mean, I couldn't have he was really there on the draft by draft basis for this story. Now, when I give a draft or a manuscript to my mother, which I do, because her opinion, I mean, who could you, what more could you wish for? Like someone who's so talented and so wonderful. I am so nervous. My stomach just twists up in knots. And I wait by the phone. I'm just like, she's going to call me and she's going to tell me the truth. And you do. I do.
It's terrible. It's terrible.
But I also, I grow a lot from those critiques. And I think over the years, we've also sort of mellowed or sanded down some of the things that can give you splinters in our working relationship to a point where, we can almost collaborate a little bit better.
Yeah, it has been hard at times, and in part because, I teach, so I tell the complete honest truth, my reaction to people's writing, because I work with so many students where I know it's their life, it's life's desire, and I'm not helping them by, giving them false support. So the idea of being critical, but in a loving, supportive way, I try to do with my students and try to do with my daughter as well. But this is the truth. When you're writing your stories, they're like your heart. They're like your children. You are so nervous. You care so much about it, so that it's always tricky, and it always drives you crazy. Like I used to throw pillows at my husband, or I wouldn't speak to him for days, but over time with our spouses and with each other, I think the thing that's kept us together is that we all care about telling the best story. So even our first readers, or when you read for me, we're trying to help each other. And generally, the person who's criticizing you is really maybe not so much criticizing what you're doing, but really saying, are you sure you haven't cheated the process? Have you really done it the best way, even though that might be the harder way?
Yes. And I will say, for all the aspiring writers out there, and I think that I did learn this young, because and I'll just tell, this is maybe the last time I'll tell this story. I don't know if she's okay with it, but one of Jewell's MFA students was Tiare Jones, who the author of American Marriage. And she gave me one of my very first critiques.
Yeah.
She also had me get my eyebrows waxed for the first time. So, forever in love with this woman. But she gave me one of my first critiques, and it was harsh, and I was young, and it was right. But for all the aspiring writers out there, the best thing that you can do is just teach yourself to absorb criticism as a gift. I mean, just don't react. Just take it in. Like if you can get one superpower for yourself, let it be that you always take everything as a learning experience. You don't take anything personally. And so I think that that's something that, it's a journey for everyone, because of course, like you said, it is like our babies, like our children. But I mean, it's a gift when someone critiques your work. If you have an opportunity to make something better, it's an absolute gift.
So I would just simply say that as a writer to be, or a writer, keep reading and keep listening. There does come a point, though, as you get older, when you get that critique, and it's equally important that maybe 1 out of 10 times you'll go, no, my way is right. And so that critiques help you listen, help you learn, and also help you become more yourself, where you have the self-confidence to know when you've done it right.
That's true.
Any other questions?
Yes. So, Kelly, what research did you do for creating the cult that Agnes is in?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I always think of writing as like my way of dreaming awake. It's like, when you have nightmares, what you're really doing is processing your fears. And when I was young, growing up in Northern Arizona, the Southwest, for whatever reason, and it's true even here in Colorado, I live in Colorado Springs, it's cult central. Like if you want to start a cult, apparently you come here. And I don't know if it's the isolation, the heat, what it is, but we had a cult. Not exactly in the neighborhood, but they had an outpost in Northern Arizona and also one in Utah. They were called the Fundamentalist Church of Latter-day Saints, not to be confused in any way with the Mormon religion, which is like totally different. They disowned this splinter group, and the prophet, their leader, is now serving prison time for marrying underage children. But they were always on the news, and the craziest things would be happening out at this compound. And they wore these prairie dresses, and they weren't allowed to have contact with outsiders. And I remember seeing this video clip of the FBI came in and tried to rescue the women and children. And the women and children didn't want to go. They were screaming. They wanted to stay. It was the only place they'd ever known. And it terrified me on such a deep level that someone else could have so much control of your thoughts and your mind. I always just had this fascination with cults and how that worked. And I did do a lot of research. I read a lot of books about it. And one of the things that I learned, I think one of the most important things, is that we all sort of think, oh, it could never happen to me. But the truth is that cults and fundamentalist organizations operate in very specific ways. They operate in many of the same ways, depriving you of the things that you need to maintain your free will. It really could happen to anyone. And people who are raised in cults and then go on to escape, I think of them essentially as superheroes. What they do, the way that they free their mind and liberate themselves, it's super heroic. And if you're interested at all in that type of story, you should read a memoir called Escape, written by Carolyn Jessup, who escaped from that FLDS cult that I was just mentioning. She escapes because one of her children wasn't going to survive there. And she was the very first woman to escape from that cult in decades and maintain custody of her children. So that's a very powerful book.
And Kelly, I, of course, never knew that. I mean, I didn't realize as a child how all that information was really, so upsetting for you, and how that it would then transform itself into this beautiful novel that you've written. It's really interesting.
Another book I can recommend is Educated by Tara Westover. I actually read that in the process of revising my novel, and it informed one of the scenes when Agnes, she gets out of this cult, and she hasn't read anything except for the Bible and essentially the propaganda that she's been given. And she finally, for the first time in her life, sees an outsider library, and she's just struck in the gut by this great sense of loss, that there was all that she could have known, all that she could have learned. But it was hidden from her. And that is the deepest cruelty, I think, of cults, that they pretend that the outside world isn't worth knowing.
I'll add in a second for the Educated by Tara Westover. I've taught the book for a couple years now to college students who are just enthralled by it. And it is that sense of defining yourself and how much there is to know, and having the courage to allow yourself, despite people that hold you back, to go out and discover and explore.
Yeah. And then I do see a question down there, and I think Jeanette asked this earlier. Do we critique each other's manuscripts?
I got to get my phone, my computer.
This
Dude, go,
Well-
Kelly. You start.
So I do not critique Jewell's manuscripts because she has been writing for 8,000 years. Just kidding, not that long, but a long time. Okay. So I don't give you any critiques. I mean, I it wouldn't be my place. Your books are wonderful. I mean, even when I was rereading Black Brother to get ready to go on this virtual tour, I was stunned, humbled, just blown away by what you can accomplish.
So I thank you, sweetie. I, of course, have welcomed my kids reading my books, but I think connected to an earlier question. It's sort of like this is my work, this is my job, and it's sort of like I don't want to make it a requirement that you have to read my books or you have to do this. This is just happens to be what Mama does. So I think it's a blessing when you do pick up my books. And then Kelly asked me because she's seen me teach all the time. Another one of my favorite roles. And her brother will ask me because her brother writes poetry. And I do my best and hope that I'm not like gonna destroy the mother-daughter or mother-son relationship forever. but yeah.
I mean, I remember.
Well, you critique me when you were younger. You could critique me now.
Oh, well, I was, the teenage arrogance maybe tries to critique Jewell, but I know better now. But it's, I remember, so basically, Agnes at the End of the World, I turned it in, and I am so grateful for the editor who accepted it, because this thing was a mess. This manuscript, I had to start from page 1 and start over, and I had a year to write it, essentially, before I had to turn, less than a year. And so I would sometimes call you and I would say, okay, I have this scene. It's a scene, they're driving. Like, can you tell me, like, is the pacing right? And I was always I'm so lucky that you would get right back to me. I mean, sometimes within the hour, like, really, it's giving.
I do. Yeah, I do.
You would say, oh, no, your pacing's okay. I mean, I would maybe speed it up down here, and so we sort of have worked out that type of relationship now, where I have really specific questions, but also the confidence that, I'm going to pull it together eventually. And I think that helps.
That does. And do you know who's she's out there? I just saw Susan.
I think I might be having connectivity.
Susan Osbald Pomeroy was a graduate student of mine at Arizona State, and it's so lovely to see you.
Susan, it's so good to see you. I believe you also had to read some of my terrible poetry at the time.
Maybe, and your husband was such a dear. Remember, he did the Antarctica slides for us. And Susan's a wonderful poet, and she has her own family. So we must catch up, Susan. It's a joy to have you in our lives as well.
No, Susan, I remember you absolutely vividly, and taking care of me and my brother, and taking us to California Pizza Kitchen. So I don't know if you remember that. It's like it was yesterday. But we did pop up a question here, and I think that we might be having connectivity issues on our moderator side.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, but you can't see me, or you can? Sorry.
We can see you. It goes in and out, but.
Okay, I'm so sorry. I'm not sure what's happening. My Wi-Fi says it's working, but yeah, there is a question for Jewell, which is, does being an academic, I think it's for Jewell, might be for you as well, Kelly, but does being an academic get in the way of your creativity?
Oh, not at all. I get paid to read books. And I also get to enjoy and see kids respond to stories. I mean, when you have an audience read Toni Morrison for the first time, or read Tara Westover's Educated, or Just Mercy. And one of the things that I also teach is Hamilton, the musical, for my ethnic studies kids. The kids think they're not kids, they're young adults. They're college kids. Okay, college folks. They think I'm so cool because we talk about Hamilton, the musical, and talk about the rap and the rhyme and the poetry, and then do the remix. Kelly, I'm so cool at school. But anyway, no, I find it being a great job, a great counterpart to writing stories. It thrills me.
Was that always true? I sort of have a follow-up question to that. Like when you were an assistant professor, I remember you would get assigned, like now you can sort of choose what you want to teach, but you used to get assigned, okay, you've got to teach science fiction, go,
Yes,
Was
yes,
it,
yes.
was it still as synergistic or?
At the time when it was a new topic, no, it was not as synergistic, but I was very lucky because your dad knew all about science fiction. I learned it and now I love it. And I then was able to say years later, oh, you got to read Octavia Butler. So it is just true, like, educated, that the more you read, the more educated you get. And I have a job that requires me to stay educated. And even though I can now pick what I teach, I change up what I teach, try and include current books, and also will sometimes pick a topic that forces me to get outside my comfort zone and learn something new. How do you think, even though I'm 8,000 years old, I stay so young?
I just love that you remember that number. You are very young, not a day
Yes,
over
another question.
25. Yeah. Do we have any new questions? Well, I would love to ask you about your writing process. Do you want to tell me a little bit how you get from
My writing
idea
process,
to book?
usually I get ideas for books that I've read something, I've seen it in the newspaper, I've learned something watching a documentary, and then it just sort of sticks with me and won't let go. Like fencing and Alexander Dumas, I read that in a Smithsonian magazine when I was in my 20s, over 40 some years ago. And I just always knew I would write a novel or a story about that. So it's been percolating. So I have long gestation periods. I don't plot at all. What I have to do is hear the voice of the character. And sometimes it'll take me a few months to get that voice, or sometimes 6 months. I remember how I tried to write a novel about a man from a man's point of view. That was Magic City, which is coming out again next year because it's actually, I was writing about the Tulsa race riot before it was well known. Over 22 years ago, I published Magic City. So HarperCollins will bring it out again next year. But for 6 months, I tried to get the voice of the young man, Joe. And your dad, Kelly, would say, nope, that's not it. Men don't talk like that. And I'd have a fit and just go back again. But once I hear the voice and learn it, I can write the story. And then I just imagine the drama of me being that character, kind of like acting and thinking about what am I feeling, what's going to happen next. And I sort of guide my way along. And then like you, I rely on dreams. Dreams give me a lot of information and I'll solve a lot of writing problems in my dreams. But that's why I'm so slow, I think, that it's sort of like much more an intuitive process for me.
Well,
How
I just
about
wanted
you?
to say this was just a quick shout out, and then I see we have an amazing question from Laura. But Magic City was one of the best books that you've ever written, and it really didn't get the attention that it deserved in 1997. There were outlets that wouldn't refuse to review it because they were burying that history, essentially.
Yeah,
But
yes,
yeah.
we'll talk about that some other time.
Yeah, but I still remember the first line, like Joe had decided to quit dreaming. I don't even own a copy of this book, but I remember that. And that's has always been true. The voice for you is this, and that's why I think your books are so incredible. Is the voices just pull you along. But
Thank you.
yeah. But Laura's question. Do you think Agnes or the brothers would march in the current Black Lives Matter protest? Let's start with you. I'll hold up your brothers.
Absolutely. My brothers would march. The whole family would march in the Black Lives Matter movement. Definitely. Here.
Yeah. And Agnes, you see sort of this red ribbon in her hair. So she grew up in a fundamentalist cult that was also, although I didn't dive very deeply into it in this book, deeply racist. Like she meets the nurse who's helping her get insulin for Ezekiel while they're still in the cult is a Black woman, and she knows the prophet would see her as a child of Cain, but it was hard for her to see her that way. And she's basically told that anyone who's different from the way that they're living are damned, like, and are going to die in this apocalypse. And the color red is also forbidden. When she puts this red ribbon in her hair, which was a symbol that I added late in the revision process, it's a mark to say that she's in rebellion, and what she's rebelling against is all intolerance. So
Yes.
any form of it. And I can see her marching. I can see her sister Beth marching. Her sister also narrates half of this book.
Yes.
And I can see everyone in the new community, the new world that they built marching. Yeah.
Likewise, Dante and Trey, they would probably get all their whole school kids marching, because at the very end, they decide, oh, I don't have it, to make T-shirts that say Heritage is Lit. And they get all their classmates to wear these T-shirts to celebrate their heritage. Oh, thank you. Heritage is lit. But for those of you that don't know, this is the academic in me. Being a child of Cain, having the mark of Cain was used as a religious justification for why Black people should be enslaved. That the mark of Cain, in fact, became the dark skin. And so ministers would preach in the South that, that these poor Black people are our children and they need to be uplifted, clear racism and a misunderstanding
yes. And like one of the
word.
reasons that Agnes has to refashion her idea of God and her idea of faith is because so much of it has been made toxic in every possible way. The main issue that I deal with in the book is misogyny, but there's also, there's also racism. There's every other type of ism you can imagine. And she wants to start from scratch. That's her dream. And that's sort of my hope and my dream for young people in the world today, is that they just create the world they want to see, and they get rid of everything that doesn't serve them, everything that we have left around that's still toxic and still plaguing us. So
that's why I think we're in a second wave of the civil rights. That my generation, at the death of Emmett Till, which I talk about in Ghost Boys, his mama said, "I want the world to see what they've done to my boy." And the world seeing that began a great catalyst, a movement towards civil rights. We get MLK, we get Rosa Parks, and a lot of change happened, but not enough. And now we're having another wave of the civil rights movement, again, inspired, unfortunately, by the death of Black people. But that wave that's happening now is very important. And I think it's going to really carry us even further to a better world.
Right. And we have a good question too from Eric. To me, I understand that you're writing another novel. Can you say a bit about it? Yes, and I'm happy to say too about the trend. So I hopefully in the next year or so, you're about to see a lot of YA historical fiction that is writing about buried history. And so I'm going to be writing a story called Mirror Girls about two twin sisters who are born in the Jim Crow South. And their parents are murdered because they are a mixed couple in a small the extremely racist Georgia town. And one of the children is light enough to pass and the other isn't. So they separate them. And many years later, the long lost sisters come together and try and solve this murder, or try and uncover this history. And, I've been talking to a lot of writers, and a lot of us, Black women in particular, are going into this historical. And I think it's because just so much has been lost to us for so long. I mean, this idea that kids were just learning what Juneteenth was for the first time this year. I think that there are just things that are going to be coming to light, and I'm really excited for that.
A lot of that happened too for my generation, and for me, having gone to school and read it and learned all these sort of Western narratives, stories, discovering things, which is why I wrote about Tulsa Race Riot, or Marie Laveau, the Voodoo Queen, or the fact that Frederick Douglass's wife, Anna, never learned how to read or write, even though Douglass said, "Reading freed me." And also Zora Neale Hurston and the womanist movement that Alice Walker had. So I think there's a kind of re-echoing now of what also happened to me as a young woman. And that's very, very, very powerful. So maybe we keep re-echoing it until we get it right, or we keep re-echoing it until we finally make it better. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I have a lot of hope for change right now. I've been hopeful that the protests have been sustained. And back to that amazing question. I love this question about whether our characters would march, because just as a writer, like your mind, you want to imagine and picture this. A lot of my book was really inspired by sort of the old Black liberation theology that Christianity has historically been used to oppress people, but it has a very strange tendency to backfire because there are all sorts of liberation messages in there and messages about believing in yourself and in your own soul and in the specialness of your own identity. And so, yeah, I think
love for others.
And love for others and acceptance. And so, yeah, I think Agnes would be marching. But that's a fantastic question.
What's really also interesting about this moment is that at the time that I married Kelly's dad, he married Brad, I very much did not want to marry a white guy because there was so much racism on the streets, so much backlash, and I experienced, so much prejudice that I was just, scared, but I loved him. He's my true love. And then I said, I'm not going to have kids. And he says, oh, no, you can't patronize our kids. It'll be fine. Okay, we're going to have kids. And we did. And I've also then with him gone through the experience of how this race biased and gender biased culture, sexism, I've seen the effects that it's had on both of you. But I've also seen how you both are strong warrior people carrying it onward to another level. But when your mom and dad were marrying, it wasn't too soon after Loving versus Loving. And that's a great picture book, as well as a middle grade book about how Baltimore, the Maryland area, imprisoned a family for being an interracial couple. So things have changed and they will change. But like my grandma said, we're all a mixed blood stew anyway. And that's, I think, at the root of Black brother, that genetically we are all a mixture of heritages, I have white, Scottish, and Norwegian in me, and Nigerian and Bantu, that I don't think there is such a thing as a pure anything except a pureness of heart, mind, and spirit.
Well, we definitely don't want to tax you guys too much. You guys have been too fun, but this is,
Puerto Rican.
Yeah, Puerto Rican. I know, that's fantastic. Yeah, and I was going to say too, color is a very interesting thing because based on what city I'm in, I tend to get, asked if I'm various different things. But anyway, if any last questions, I guess we'll give a last chance.
You're for Puerto Rican power. Wow.
I wish that some friends could have seen this. Can they do so afterwards online?
Can we do some what?
Can people watch this afterwards online?
Yes.
Has it been recorded? Yes.
You can. I'm not sure where the link lives. I believe Miami Book Fair. It'll be on Miami Book Fair's site. But if you want to email me, I can get it for you. Or I can send it to you too. My email is Christina, CRISTINAR, Christina R at Books and Books. There you go. You can view at the same link. Perfect. Thank you, Marcy. So this very link will remain live and you can share it with people.
And actually, Jeanette, I think Jeanette said you were Puerto Rican. One of the things about Ghost Boys is a sticker. It says, everyone needs their story heard, felt. We honor each other, connect across time, though you saw it backwards. So we honor each other, connect across time. So I'd say Kelly and I both are devoted to creating stories, encouraging young people, all people, to tell their stories and to have a world where her child, my grandchild, no child grows up not knowing that there's a wide array of narratives, a wide array of stories to pay attention to.
Thank you guys so much.
Jewell Thank you so much.
This was amazing. It was wonderful.
Please buy the books from Books and Books.
Yes, please.
They're fantastic. We love you guys so much. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you, everyone who joined in. It's been an awesome evening. So I hope everyone has a good night and we stay in touch. Thank you again. Good night, everyone.
Have a great evening. Thank you. Good night.